This is Support is Sexy, episode 580, and today we have a Support is Sexy rewind with Entrepreneurial You author, Dorie Clark. Welcome to Support is Sexy. I'm your host, Elayne Fluker, entrepreneur, author, and founder of Chic Rebellion Media. 5 days a week, Monday through Friday, I bring you inspiring women entrepreneurs who share their wins and lessons to help you take your business to the next level. Here we go. Hi, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Support is Sexy. I hope all is well with you. Thank you so much for being here. You know, it just would not be the same without you. And this month, if you're listening to this in real time, it's December 2018. So we're going to do a few rewinds this month, episodes throughout the year that really resonated with you all, that resonated with me. You know, I learned a lot from these women that I talked to. And this is one of those episodes with Dorie Clark, author of the book Entrepreneurial You. My copy of this book, almost every other page, I'm not even joking, the pages are turned over, highlights, notes in the margins. I mean, Dorie is tons of great information, so much so that during this episode, she basically had to almost hang up on me during our call because I wanted to go so far over, but she's a busy person. She had tons of other interviews and things to do, but we did get lots of great information and tips from her. So this is one of our first rewinds for December 2018. And this was recorded initially, or aired, I should say, initially back in January of 2018. So get your notepads ready. The information is still good. Get ready for Dorie Clark. So Dorie, thank you so much for joining me for an episode of Support is Sexy. I am ecstatic to talk to you.
Thank you, Elayne. Glad to talk with you as well.
Absolutely. As I warned you, I have so many questions about your book, but we're going to try to get through most of it. But truly, thank you so much for taking the time to be here.
Awesome. I'm excited.
Excellent. So our first question, when did you first fall in love with entrepreneurship?
Well, you know, I never really thought that I was going to be an entrepreneur, but I was working when the idea kind of first occurred to me that this was a possibility. I was working as the executive director of a nonprofit, and I was under so much stress. It was a very stressful job. I had responsibility for raising the money almost exclusively because my board didn't do that much fundraising, and we had a staff to support and everything. And it just kind of hit me, something that had never really occurred to me before, although it should have, which is that, number one, I was running a small business. You know, being an executive director of a nonprofit is basically the same thing as running a small business. Mm-hmm. And then a minute later, I'm like, wait a minute, I could run a business for myself. And if I did that, I would have a lot less stress, and I could probably make a lot more money. And so from that moment, I realized that I had been cultivating the skills that I needed to be an entrepreneur. And so I started making plans to launch my own entrepreneurial venture, which I did about a year later.
Mm-hmm. Now tell us about your background and where you grew up.
I grew up in a small town in North Carolina called Pinehurst, and it was a really small town. It's gotten bigger over the years since I left, but it was pretty far from a lot of cultural attractions. It was maybe 90 minutes from Raleigh-Durham, and so it was not really the place for me. My parents had moved there to play golf because it was a golf resort, and this was just not exciting to me as a child. And so I really wanted to try to get out as soon as I could. So I planned it out, and I actually, fortunately, was able to do that. I was able to leave for college early, which was great for me. But it provided a lot of motivation, actually, for me to work hard and excel, because I knew that I needed to try to accelerate my chances of going somewhere else that I felt suited me better.
Was it that you were bored there as a young person? Being around the golf course, I would imagine, is boring unless you play golf as well. Or was it that you had some other kinds of ideas about what you wanted to do with your life or spend your time, you know, as you got older, of course?
I was definitely pretty bored around the golf course for sure. Yeah, it's just I would see movies or television programs or things like that about big cities, and they just seemed so exciting to me. It just seemed like there was so much more going on. It was, people doing exciting things, and I loved the cultural opportunities, and it just wasn't what I saw happening around me. So I, on a lot of levels, I felt like I didn't really fit in, and I thought that some other place would be better.
So where did you go to college?
I did my first 2 years at Mary Baldwin College, now Mary Baldwin University in Virginia, and they had a special program there for high school girls to enter college early. And so I did that for 2 years, and then I transferred to Smith in Western Mass, where I finished up.
Okay, I thought you would have gone further north, but eventually you did.
Eventually I did. Where are you from originally, Elayne?
New York.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, New York. I'm in Atlanta now, but I'm from New York, so I have a little bit of bias.
So we traded places.
Exactly. That's right. Now, you mentioned that you eventually, with your work, you thought you would, you started thinking about becoming an entrepreneur. But when you went to school and when you studied, did you have an idea of what you wanted to become at that time? I know a lot of us figure it out in college, but what were your aspirations for when you got older?
Well, I had a little bit of trouble figuring out what I wanted to do. There were definite possibilities, and I think my ideas were not bad ones. I feel like I actually did a decent job as a college student coming up with possibilities for myself. So, for instance, I did internships when I was in college. One was I was an intern for NOW, the National Organization for Women, the activist group. Mm-hmm. Another internship I did was at a PR firm in Washington, and another was at a big advertising agency in New York City. So those are all things that I actually am still interested in. I nonprofit activism and communications, marketing, that kind of stuff. I mean, that actually is in many ways still my world. But I remember when I was a senior in college, somebody, I forget who, maybe the Career Services Office or some talk I heard, they said that a good thing to do if you wanted to figure out what job to have, a good thing to do was to write down and make a list of the things that you liked to do, and then try to match it to see if there was a job that allowed you to do those things. And I thought, okay, that seems plausible. So I made this list, and it actually is kind of funny because it just sort of goes to show you the importance of really crafting your own career direction, because it was a little quirky. Mm-hmm. But the two major things on my list of what I enjoyed doing were reading the newspaper and giving people my opinion.
Yeah, I love it. Giving people your opinion is the best. I need a job that fits that.
Yeah, exactly. So I kind of do that now. Mm-hmm. So I feel like, okay, it worked out.
Yeah, and the newspaper thing is keeping up with what's going on and the trends. That's how I interpret your list from college. Now, Today, you're keeping up with things that are going on, and then, of course, you give people your opinions.
It's true. And in fact, I do read the newspaper a lot. I still read the newspaper every day. I read it for like an hour every day.
Oh,
I love it.
So that's really a part of your life today.
Yeah.
Okay, so now when you're back to, or I guess moving us back forward to the position at the nonprofit, you're in the executive director position, you're thinking about entrepreneurship, and then tell us about the moment, which you talk about in Entrepreneurial You, your book, but tell us about the moment that really sort of pushed you into entrepreneurship fully.
Well, so after I had this sort of revelation about I'm kind of running a business now. Mm-hmm. I should just do this. I planned it out for a while, and this is something that I actually do recommend for people considering entrepreneurship. That part of what holds a lot of people up or makes them not actually do entrepreneurship, even if they're interested in it, is this cultural bias, I think, in terms of how we present entrepreneurship, because the story so often is about like, oh, you just quit your job and you leap. And, that sounds horrifying. And so who would want to do that? But in my case, I actually spent about a year in between deciding to do it and doing it. And during that year, I tried to be very assiduous about really having a curriculum for myself. And so I took courses. I took multiple adult ed courses. I read books all the time from the library and just tried to think about, okay, what gaps do I have in my knowledge about how to run a business, and what is the best thing that I can do. So that was my game plan, and I was able then after a year to feel, not like I knew everything I needed to know. I certainly didn't, but felt much better prepared than I would have been otherwise to feel comfortable about launching out and becoming an entrepreneur.
I think that's such a good idea too, a good suggestion for people, as you said, because it sounds like, let me know if I'm wrong, it sounds like you didn't even know exactly what kind of business you would start. I think sometimes we wait for that too. I have to know exactly what I'm going to start. You were doing the research, if you will, and just educating yourself about entrepreneurship overall. That's what it sounds like. Yeah,
that's exactly right. I did. I mean, I ended up even changing my original business model because I had thought that I would perhaps become a political consultant. That was the thing that kind of made the most sense to me initially, because I had worked in politics before, and I thought, I can monetize this. But it turned out that, as is often the case, the market sometimes shows you that your initial idea is not the right one. And so,
or the timing, right?
Yeah, exactly. So I was not getting a lot of political clients, but what I started to get unexpectedly was nonprofit and government clients. And so I was like, oh, okay, well, I'm smart enough to go where the business is. So I'm like, all right, I won't be a political consultant. I'll just be a marketing consultant. Mm-hmm. And so that was, one early example of me sort of iterating very early on the business.
Right. Now, in your book, you also talk about the importance of us having quote unquote portfolio careers, which is a term I hadn't heard before. And you mentioned that for entrepreneurs and people who have a 9-to-5. So how do you define a portfolio career, and why is it important for us, especially in today's economy?
Yeah, thank you. So I define a portfolio career as essentially a career that has different pieces to it, so you're doing multiple things. It's not just one thing. So for instance, if you have a day job, that's great, but a great way to essentially de-risk yourself, to give yourself more options and more potential to be able to earn money, is to have a side gig, a side hustle. And that can become part of your portfolio. Just like an artist has, a portfolio with lots of different things, or you have a stock portfolio with, it's all your investments together, but there's different constituent parts. If we think of our careers more like that, it can be very helpful to us.
Right. I love the idea of the art as the stock analogy, but also the artist. That really rang true for me just then, because you think they don't just say, this is my one piece. It's okay, what else have you done? What are your other pieces? What is your portfolio? Excellent. So now it's been said that the most successful entrepreneurs have 7 streams of income, which in reading your book, you seem to have 7 streams of income: writing your books, speaking, let me know if I miss any, teaching, business school, consulting, coaching, courses, and affiliate income.
You got it. Although in the interim, I've added another one, which is doing live events. Yes,
live events. I'm going to ask you about events. Wonderful. I'm so excited. Everyone, I told Dorie beforehand how super excited I am to talk to her. I have so many questions. The book is so good. Of course, I'll link to it, but it really is fantastic. So great. I'm excited to hear about all of those, including your experience with events, which is, on a selfish note, something that I've been thinking more about. So I really would love to hear about that. But now tell us, we're going to go through, I'd like to go through, I should say, do 7 strategies that you share in Entrepreneurial You and how entrepreneurs can use them effectively. The first one, close to my heart, writing a book. So how do we use writing a book or publishing a book as something that can help us as entrepreneurs?
Yeah, absolutely. This is a big one.
This is a big one.
So writing a book is a great way to establish yourself as a thought leader. I think that's really the key. I mean, of course, you can earn money from it, although oftentimes not that much. I wouldn't primarily think of it as a money-making device unless you kind of strike it rich and become the next John Grisham. But what it is amazing for is having it as a credibility-building device. And for instance, for me, something that was very noticeable was from the beginning, from the time that I started my business, had been giving talks as a way of promoting my business, but they were always free talks. And, honestly, no one was interested in giving me money for them. Mm-hmm. But once my first book came out, then the situation changed because people really do consider you an expert if you have this book. I think there's sort of an unspoken concept that, like, well, if you can write 250 pages about something, you must really know it. And it just kind of gives you this extra credibility where suddenly it does open up higher profile possibilities. And I did start to be able to get paid keynote opportunities, which was a big deal.
Do you think it matters whether a book is self-published or published by a big publishing house? I come from the publishing industry with magazines and that kind of thing. So we've always thought books have to come from a publishing house. But now with self-published books being so popular, does it carry as much weight? Do you think people who have speaking engagements, or rather people who get speakers, look at that?
I think that it certainly is changing, but I think there is at present still a bias toward having a commercially published book. I think in a few years there probably will not be much of a distinction, but for now I think that there still is, and there's asterisks to this, of course. For instance, if you have a book that is very niche by design, a mainstream publisher is probably not going to be interested in it because, of course, they want something that can sell lots of copies to lots of people. So if your niche is, social media for gardeners, right, then, you're probably not going to get HarperCollins to publish it. But, so let's say you self-publish it. That doesn't mean that you can't become an authority speaking at the gardening conferences. I think that that's totally doable. But there is still, if you're talking about broad topics, leadership, marketing, whatever, there is still the importance of having a kind of commercial imprimatur. Another asterisk too is that I don't think that you necessarily have to keep doing commercial publishing. There are a lot of people who have published commercially in the past and now kind of zoom back and forth between self-publishing and traditionally publishing. Yeah, because, they've proven themselves, right? It's not, people are not looking at them like, oh, poor Joe, he couldn't get a book deal. It's like, no, he's had plenty of book deals. He just, might want to do a book that is a passion project rather than something that is, the publishers think is going to be a big mainstream success, or maybe he doesn't feel like he needs the publishers anymore, and so he's pursuing it on his own.
What I found too, as someone who's has an agent and who's shopping a book too, is that a lot of the feedback, for me at least, has been they love the idea, love what it's about, love who I am or what I'm doing, but so much. And by they, I mean the editors that we've talked to, so not everyone, but so many of them say that the industry right now is looking for quote unquote celebrity or someone, like you who's already proven themselves. But otherwise, so much is about celebrity now, or celebrity being huge on social media and all these other things that don't go as much into. But is the story good? Do you like the book? Do you like the idea? So for people, I just mentioned that just for folks not to be discouraged if you are trying to work with, one of the bigger or commercial publishers, as you said, and you're not getting the feedback that you hope. It also has to do, I think, with where the industry is right now as well.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. So one of the next strategies that you mentioned is building your email list. So even in the days, as I just mentioned, of social media being everywhere, why are email lists still crucial for entrepreneurs especially?
Well, email lists are actually becoming increasingly essential. Even though they're not quite so sexy, right? You're not going to see front page New York Times articles about, Russia's hacking email lists.
Right. Exactly.
Social media is the thing that people like to talk about, but that does not mean that it is the most important thing necessarily from a business perspective.
Mm-hmm.
So email is valuable because at a very basic level, Facebook, Twitter, et cetera, LinkedIn, they're all publicly traded. And so therefore, they have one mandate. Let's maximize value to shareholders. And that means that over time, it is in their interests to make it harder and harder and harder for you to reach your customers unless you pay them. And so we've already seen that just by, algorithm changes, which of course in their terms of service, they can make it at any time. They are throttling it so that even for people you're connected to, you may not really be able to reach them effectively. Whereas for email, people have proactively opted in, and you have a direct connection to them without a middleman. There's not going to be somebody that's like, oh yeah, you can talk to this person if you give me $10. You have that link. And the other thing that's really important, of course, is that for most professionals, you check social media, but you don't necessarily check everything on social media. You're going to miss some stuff. It's not like you're scrolling all the time. For email, that is, for most professionals, their version of mission control. They're not going to miss something in their inbox. Their inbox is this sacrosanct place. And if someone has offered you the chance to reach their inbox, that is extraordinarily powerful. And the open rates are literally 10 times higher than the chances that a given person will see a social media message.
So what would you say are 3 smart ways for us to build our email list?
Well, I think that when it comes to building an email list, there's the biggest thing to keep in mind is the importance of creating a so-called opt-in lead magnet. And basically what this means for the uninitiated is that instead of saying, let's say at the end of like a blog post or something, hey, click here to sign up for my email list, you have something better to say. Because the truth is, sign up for my email list in 2017, 2018 does not sound like a very attractive offer.
Right. What are you giving me?
Yeah, people are like, why would I want to do that? Like, they feel like, oh, I need another email, like I need a hole in the head.
Right.
So they just don't want to do it. So you need to offer them something better that they're actually going to be excited about. And so therefore, that is the opt-in lead magnet. And what could a lead magnet be? Essentially, it's anything that your target audience would find interesting or valuable. It could be an ebook, a short ebook. It could be a series of videos. It could be, maybe a special private interview you've done. It could be a script for something. If they need to execute on something, you could give them a script for it. It could be a checklist. It could be a list of resources that they could, download or have or buy or whatever. I mean, there's a million options. But if you can find something where people are like, oh, that sounds nice, I need that, then it greatly increases the likelihood that they are going to click download, that they are going to opt in and give you their email address. And that at least gives you a bite at the apple to try to keep them on your email list. They, of course, can unsubscribe at any time, but hopefully they will try your email list and be like, oh, this is actually way more interesting than I might have thought. I will keep choosing to receive emails from her. And that is how you are able to build up your list.
Yes, and one of the things that I did, I guess it was last year now, but luckily it's an evergreen thing that I offer to people who sign up for my email list is what I call a Brave Decisions course, but it's audio. Since podcasting is my thing, like people do video courses or not courses, a training, I guess, over a few days, and you sign up for the email and you get it that way. So for people listening, as Dorie said, with all the suggestions that she mentioned, but really it's finding too, where's your zone of genius or the thing that you can offer that makes the most sense for you and what you're doing as well.
Yeah, I think that's a great point, and it's a great question to be asking yourself.
Yes. So do you think, just one more on emails, do you think that it matters if we're not emailing every day or we're not emailing on a very consistent schedule? Should we decide what our frequency is going to be and stick to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think consistency is important.
Mm-hmm.
It would certainly throw somebody off if, they get 3 emails from you one week and then no emails for 3 weeks. They're like, wait, what?
Right. They might forget why they signed up. That's what I tell people.
Yeah, exactly. So what I like to say is that it is important to make sure that you're not emailing too frequently, of course, because there are some people. I mean, I think that the boundary is bigger than people imagine, but I've certainly subscribed to some things like, somebody's doing a launch or whatever, and they're sending 4 a day, and you're just like, oh my God.
Too much.
And the advocates of that approach, they will say, well, every time you mail, you get more sales. You're leaving money on the table. And, I'm sure that's true. I'm 100% sure. These folks test ROI, 100% sure that's true. At a certain point, I don't care, because it's really about your reputation, I think, more than that. And I think that you kind of make yourself look bad if you are pushing that hard. That is my personal opinion. And, maybe people are looking to maximize different outcomes. For me, maximizing money is not necessarily the outcome that I want to push. I would rather maximize long-term relationships and long-term reputation. Mm-hmm. But just as pernicious is not emailing often enough, because, as you say, people might forget. And, you want to stay fresh in people's minds. So I would say the minimum that someone should be emailing is, let's say, monthly. And I'm a bigger fan of, if you want to go on the softer side, maybe twice a month. I like personally, maybe what I do at least is usually a weekly email. Sometimes if I'm super busy, I won't do it in a given week, but typically it's a weekly email. And then if there is something special going on, I might send an additional email that week as well. Something like that.
What works best for you as a content creator or for your team? Is it sending it knowing that, say, the email goes out every Wednesday, or is it kind of when you're inspired to send, or you figure out what you're going to talk about week to week?
I think that it is useful to create an editorial calendar, for sure. It helps prevent a lot of last minute chaos. That being said, I don't necessarily hew to it perfectly. And there's examples of things. I mean, let's say you send emails every Monday. Well, okay, as we're recording this coming Monday is Christmas. So maybe that's not the day that you're going to, that the open rate is not going to be boffo on Christmas. Right. So maybe you're like, this week, maybe something different. So I think a little flexibility is good, but overall, being more consistent rather than less is advantageous.
All right. Now let's talk about, this is a tough one, or maybe it's not. I'm projecting. Attracting your ideal client. How do we attract our ideal clients?
Well, I think that attracting your ideal client is actually in some ways not that hard, because what often prevents you from attracting the ideal client is the step before it, which is knowing who your ideal client is. That's a tricky part. If you don't know who they are, then you're going to have a lot of trouble
attracting them, right?
So getting really, really clear on that process, which involves a lot of things, right? Part of it is about, understanding who you can serve best. Part of it is understanding, really getting in the head of your target audience. Well, what do they need? And how does that overlap with what I can do? But let's assume that you've surmounted that and you actually do have a really clear idea. At that point, it becomes a process of getting almost to the point of an ethnographic understanding of who that person is. And this is why a lot of people start. They don't, this is not the answer for everybody. And it doesn't have to be this, right? But a lot of people start by serving an audience that is very much like them or like they used to be, because it's not a bad guess, actually, because you understand. Like if you are, let's say, a weight loss coach and you have personally lost 70 pounds and kept it off, well, okay, you have credibility. Like people would look at that and be like, okay, well, clearly she knows how to do it. But also, you really get what is going on inside people's heads. Right. You get it. You even know the language, right? Like what people are saying to themselves or why.
You intimately know the experience of going through that.
Yeah. And so it's just a qualitatively different thing. If you're writing copy for your website, you can do it with that personal experience. You can think back to like, okay, I remember on my darkest night when I thought that no one would ever love me, or when I thought it was just going to be impossible and that I tried a million times, and, like whatever it is, you go back to it. And when you say it, it sounds real because it is real. And people get that. I think a problem that people often have when they're trying to reach a target audience that is not them, it's different than them, is that maybe they just don't understand them well enough. And for instance, so it's not to say that you can't ever understand them. In fact, to the contrary, you can, but you just have to really make an effort to do it. So there's a great story that a guy who's actually a participant in my Recognized Expert program named Jeffrey Shaw has done. He has a book that's coming out early next year called Lingo, and he tells the story in this book, but he was starting a business as a portrait photographer, and he had kind of grown up sort of lower middle class, and he didn't have a lot of experience with wealthy people, but he knew that if he was actually going to have a successful business as a portrait photographer, like if you're going to be able to charge high prices, you need to be working, for people who can afford to pay high prices.
Right.
So somehow he was going to have to figure this out. And so he has this marvelous story where he talks about going to Bergdorf Goodman, a fancy department store in New York City, and he literally had $20 to spend, and which does not buy you a lot in a really fancy department store. But he knew that's where the really wealthy people went, and he's like, okay, I've got to get this. I've got to understand what it means. And so he purchased whatever he could, some little trinket for $20, and he just saw how they did it. And, like, how did they talk to him? How did they do the sales process? How did they wrap the gift? All these little subtleties that he suddenly became a student of, so that he could understand the hidden language that he had been missing, or hadn't even necessarily been aware was present up until that point. And that's the kind of deep dive that you need to do to make sure that you really understand people. I mean, I've had clients that I've worked with in the beginning stages of their business, and they'll say, "Oh, I want to reach such and such people," and I'd be like, "Well, do you know any such and such people?" And they're like, "No." Mm-hmm. I'm like, okay, you need to get some. You need to meet some.
Right. Get around those people.
Because otherwise you are just guessing and you are just going to have no idea.
I love that idea of figuring out a way. And sometimes I think, speaking as we spoke earlier about things that hold us back, we think, well, I don't know any of those people, so I just can't do this. As opposed to, what is a way that you can get around some of those people, even if they don't know that you're researching them at the time, or even if you're not in a position to send them a survey to ask them what they want. There are ways, especially now, social media, events, all kinds of ways, conferences, to get around the people that you at least think are your ideal clients or could be your ideal clients, you think?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, to me, assuming that if you don't know the people already, that you can't ever know them or you can't figure it out, it's so limiting. It would be like saying, oh, well, you're a man, and so therefore, if you're writing a novel, you could clearly never write about a woman because you just don't understand what it means to be a woman. And it's like, come on.
Right.
You can figure this out. You can ask some questions.
Exactly.
Like, this is not insurmountable.
Yes. Now, what about with our ideal clients? Are they people who can change over time? So, for example, we start off thinking, this is my ideal client, and then for whatever reason it evolves. Should we feel comfortable making a switch when we see that there needs to be a switch for whatever reason?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that really is a natural progression in a lot of ways. I mean, I'd actually be surprised for people who who never changed their ideal clients, because your business grows, and so things are going to change. I mean, even in my business, I had to make a very concerted decision, because I realized that if I didn't work to upgrade and I say upgrade, I don't mean like in terms of the quality of person or whatever, but upgrade in terms of the size of the client, in terms of the budget of the organization and what they were able to spend. I was going to be stuck at a certain income level, like pretty much forever, and it was not going to be where I wanted. Because when I started my business, I was 27 years old, and I had never worked inside a corporation, so it wasn't like I had a bunch of corporate contacts that I could fall back on and be like, hey, hire me. Mm-hmm. I had worked in newspapers. I'd worked at nonprofits. Like, I did not know a lot of wealthy people. And so I really was like, oh, I just, and so the people that I knew hired me, which was wonderful, but it would be like a nonprofit being like, hey, we have $500. Right. And so I needed to meet different kinds of people so that I could do different kinds of things.
Yes, and you tell a great story about speaking, which we're going to go into next, and a nonprofit that at first said they didn't have a budget, and then all of a sudden things changed. So everyone has to look in the book to see that story. But I think that was a great one too, just about negotiating, not even just your ideal client, but being able to negotiate for your ideal fee.
Yeah, thank you. Very true.
Absolutely. So one more question about ideal clients. I wanted to get your opinion, which is great, about the idea of evolving and getting different types of clients as you move along, because I find some of the people I speak to, meaning other entrepreneurs, sometimes feel guilty for moving on to different types of clients. It's almost as if they're leaving their friends behind or something like that. So I was interested in hearing your thoughts on it, and if that's just, a mindset thing, or what that is that sometimes makes people feel guilty for saying, okay, I'm not going for, the people who are just starting out anymore, or whatever that group is. I'm looking, say, to corporate or a sports team or whatever the new ideal client is. So I was interested to hear what your feedback was on that.
Yeah, I can certainly imagine that might be the case sometimes, but there's ways of conscious uncoupling, Elayne.
Yes. Thank you, Gwyneth, for that. Exactly. I love it. That's all we need to say about that. Exactly.
Yeah, because sure, it would be rude if all of a sudden you're just like, I'm not going to work with you anymore.
Right, exactly.
Yeah, sure. you're too small potatoes for me.
I'm moving on. Yeah.
Yeah, I clearly don't want to do that. But if you give people notice, then or you come to sort of what I'll call a natural stopping point, then it's usually fine. Oftentimes business relationships persist largely because you're driving them as the consultant. Like oftentimes a client in some ways might not even notice, which sounds terrible, but to be honest, the onus is on you as the entrepreneur to be like, so, when are we going to re-up or whatever. And so there's a lot of situations where, for instance, you could say to somebody, let's say in July, you could say, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I am going to be shifting the focus of my business a little bit more into, in 2018, 2019, whatever year we're talking about, you could say. And so, starting at the end of the year, I'm only going to be working with, companies in the financial services space, or, whatever it is. I love working with you. It's been completely awesome. And I want to make sure that you are not in any way left in the lurch. So, I'm glad, of course, to continue working with you through the end of the year. And if it would be helpful to you, I have some colleagues that I could refer you to that could take over, for these services or something like that. Just like you're giving them plenty of time. You're offering to help them make a good transition. Like, what more could you ask?
Right.
It's not like, it's your everlasting blood oath duty to provide consulting for this person. Like, you don't need to do that. So I think that would be a gracious way of doing it. Another way of doing it is, you can certainly have a kind of grandfather policy where maybe in terms of new clients, you're only accepting people who meet XYZ criteria. But if you really like your existing clients, you could continue working with them. And, that's a perfectly acceptable thing. In my book, Entrepreneurial You, one of the people that I profile is a friend of mine named Jenny Blake, who does...
Yes, I love her podcast. I heard you on her podcast, too.
Oh, yes, excellent.
The Pivot podcast, yes.
Yeah, she's wonderful. And so she, does some coaching, and... now her rates are relatively high, but she says that she still has grandfathered clients that are people that literally have been with her from the beginning, from the time she started her business. And so she has, they're like paying, I don't know, $500, $800 a month, something like that.
Right.
She's charging much more now, but because of essentially repaying their loyalty for being with her in the beginning, she's just kept their rates flat and continued to work with them. So there's that possibility as well. You can see what's right for you, but I don't think it has to be like this horrible breakup kind of scenario.
No, I love that. And thank you for basically giving us the script. I think that's perfect. Having the conversation, leaving the relationship in a good way, or saying there are ways to continue to work together. So that's perfect. Thank you for that. All right. Number 4, becoming a professional speaker, which I know you have done an incredible job of becoming a speaker. So what do you have to say about outbound marketing, which you talk about in Entrepreneurial You as what I call a fail when it comes to getting speaking opportunities?
Yeah. So outbound marketing, just to, be clear on the terms for folks, is basically where you're pitching yourself, where you're calling up, a conference organizer or whatever and being like, hey, you have a conference. I want to speak at your conference.
Right.
And, obviously that's different than like if they have an open call for submissions and you submit one or something like that, because at that point they're asking. But this would be you just kind of marketing yourself to this person. And, here's the bottom line. It can work, right? Like, it's not like it's a physical impossibility in the universe. It can work. However, it's really, really difficult for it to work. And specifically, if you want to quantify it, one of the people that I also profiled in Entrepreneurial You is a guy named Grant Baldwin. And Grant built from scratch a business as a successful professional speaker without a book, without a platform. So God bless him. He really, pushed it hard. But he did lots of cold calls. That was what was necessary for him. But he said that his success ratio was about 1 or 2 gigs out of 100. So if we're just, if we're thinking about, and it's not like, oh, he emailed them and they're like, yes, Grant. It's like he would email all these people, and then there would be a whole process, that would take oftentimes multiple months. Like, maybe a handful get back to him. They say, oh, we're not looking now, but we're looking in September. So he pings them again in September. Oh, okay. Well, then they'll have a phone call about it. Oh, well, this one likes him pretty well, so let's have a second phone call with the other person who's selecting. It's like out of this process. So you can just imagine how much time it would take. And the truth is, for most professionals, you have something better to do with your time than be cold calling 100 places to get one speech, which in the early days is maybe a speech for $500 or $1,000. It's just a kind of a waste of time. So if it's your only option and like the thing you most want to do in life is speak, okay, it can work. But what is a better strategy is 2 things. Number one, a great strategy is being just a little bit more targeted. So for instance, if there's a conference that you want to speak at, you go through and you comb your social network to try to see if there's any connection, any warm lead. This is going to immediately set you off, from the pack. So for instance, it could be a connection to somebody who is an organizer of the conference. Let's say it's blah, blah, blah professional association. Well, if it turns out that your accountant is a member of the Georgia Association of Accountants, maybe they are friends with somebody who's on the conference committee. You can kind of begin to find these things out through a lot of LinkedIn research or, looking on Facebook. Those things are valuable. So if you can get that person to recommend you, then okay, you've suddenly got some credibility. Another possibility might be looking at other speakers. So if you know people who have been a speaker in the past, they will often have the speaker roster from previous years, and you can scroll through, ask that person to recommend you. That's another really good move. So it's just getting the sort of credibility by proxy so that you're not viewed as like some random person off the street. So that would be number one.
And that's considered, sorry to interrupt, that's considered inbound marketing when you get someone to suggest you or recommend you to whatever the organization is, right?
It's I mean I guess it's almost like neither inbound nor outbound, because basically what you're doing is you're getting somebody else to do your dirty work. Right. You know, not in an evil way, but in a good way, right? It's like you're not even doing it. You're just like kind of, teeing it up and being like, hey, Elayne, I hear you know Bob. Would you mind?
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's how you have to do it.
Exactly. That's how everybody else is playing the game. So if you play the game that way, you are much more likely to be successful. The second thing, which is kind of like the best case scenario, but it takes a while to get there, that's the caveat, is to have them come to you. Right? That's inbound marketing. And how do you get them to come to you? Well, it's by building up your platform and your expertise such that you are known in your field for being an expert at that thing.
Like writing that book we talked about.
Like writing that book, exactly, or doing a lot of blogging, or you have a popular podcast or whatever it is, but it's somehow getting your ideas out into circulation in such a way. It could actually be speaking as well. It could be like maybe you've given a series of free talks, for the Chamber of Commerce or for the Rotary Club or for the, the Local First group or whatever it is. And then somebody in that audience is like, oh, you were really good. I run the blah, blah, blah conference. Maybe you should speak at that. And you're like, well, yes, maybe I should.
And that speaks to what you mentioned earlier about ways of getting in front of our ideal clients, right? Even if you may not know exactly who's in the audience, but if you have an idea that these are, for example, all entrepreneurs or in your Chamber of Commerce or wherever it is, do you think that's a great way to get in front of some of those people doing those free speeches, which is what I was going to ask you about next. Why is that a good strategy?
Yeah, totally. I mean, at a certain point, once you start getting paid to speak, then you have to be pretty judicious about the ones that are free that you say yes to.
Right.
But in the early days, you kind of say yes to everything, because it's like, hey, number one, you're actually just getting practice speaking, so you are going to get better and better. That becomes valuable. Number two, as long as it's a group that plausibly could have people who are potential clients for you, that's actually a win. You never know. It might turn into business for your company. It might turn into more speaking business. In fact, in my new book, Entrepreneurial You, I tell the story about a guy named Todd Herman, who was a youth sports coach, and he built a business for himself, not just, in fact, as a youth sports coach. It actually took him in a completely different direction, also working for adults, because he did a series of speeches, free speeches, for youth sports teams to try to market himself. And he had one demand, so to speak, which is that he was smart enough to know if he just gave speeches to a group of teenagers, great, but they don't have any money, they're not going to buy anything, and it would never even occur to them. So he said, okay, youth sports teams, I am happy to speak for free. The one requirement is that for every kid in the audience, they have to have at least one parent there, so that the buyers would be present. And so he gave these speeches, and so sure enough, they got the kids to have their parents there, and it turns out that the parents afterwards came up to him, and some for sure were like, oh, you were great, I should hire you to coach Johnny, but some of them actually said, what you said was really great, we need to hire you for my office. Right. And so he actually got an amazing start, because in these early audiences, one person who was there actually was a National Hockey League executive, and they ended up hiring him to work with pro athletes, which was like, wow. And then another person was a government official who he was in Canada, and so they hired him to work for the Canadian government. So it was just immediate over the moon social proof that he was able to get as a result of these early speaking engagements.
And I think Todd is a great example too of sometimes you just need one or two people to break through, for you to break through into these other categories. It doesn't have to be everyone in the audience comes up to you and offers you another opportunity. You never know though who those one or two people are who are there that'll help you break through in ways that, he may not have even have imagined.
Yeah, absolutely.
Excellent. And Dorie has, as you mentioned, Entrepreneurial You, so much great information about professional speaking, about fees and all of that great stuff. So everyone, going to have a link to the book. Make sure you go check it out. But I want to keep moving because I have so many more questions. The next thing I want to ask you about is starting a podcast, which is another one that's close to my heart. How can podcasting help us as entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So podcasts are pretty great. Clearly.
You're just saying that.
Well, what's wonderful about podcasts, I think, is that they kill multiple birds with one stone. Clearly, it is a form of content creation. Mm-hmm. You're creating something new that you're putting out there so that people can see, like, oh, you have good ideas. You seem smart. So that's a handy thing. Another reason that a podcast is great is it's actually a nice networking tool. It gives you an excuse to talk to and to interview people that you want to talk to anyway. Right. So that's really helpful. And, an interesting thing that I learned in blogging is that, a lot of times people will say something like, oh, well, I'd love to blog or do whatever, but, I don't know what to write about, or I don't know what I'm an expert in. And so they don't do it. But the amazing thing about interviewing someone else is that, especially early on, when you may not be totally sure about your value proposition, you don't have to be sure about your value proposition. All you have to be sure about is, who do you think is interesting? What kind of stuff do you think is cool? And you do that. You talk to other people. You help other people shine. And in the process, you are learning from them. You get this kind of personal development or professional development, and you are getting exposed to more ideas that help you later determine your own unique perspective.
That is exactly what I did, Dorie. I thought about entrepreneurship and women entrepreneurs and things that I wanted to know. And I said, well, I don't have all the answers, but I can definitely tap into people and ask them all of the questions. I always have the questions. And that is, and again, speaking back to, I always try to address this thing that holds us up from doing things. You don't have to wait for all the answers. As Dorie just said, you can think, what am I interested in? What do I think other people are interested in? If you start a podcast or whatever you're doing, even with blogging, you can do an interview series where you're finding these experts and asking them the questions. So the questions can be as enlightening for your audience as being the expert and having all the answers, I think, in my opinion.
Love it.
Yes. Now tell us why, one of the things you mentioned in the book was, I don't know if it was 2015 or last year, you did about 160 guest spots on podcasts. Right?
Yeah, it was 2015, the year that my book Stand Out was released. And then this year, when my book Entrepreneurial You was released, I have by the end of the year, which is coming up pretty rapidly,
I'm on the wrap up crew.
I will have done about just shy of 140.
Wow. So you are definitely an expert in this space. Tell us why podcast guesting can be used as a strategy also if we're entrepreneurs, because everyone doesn't have to start a podcast. Guesting, I think, can be as effective, and clearly it's working for you too. But what do you think about it, and has it helped your business at all? Yeah,
absolutely. I realized that it would be a good thing for me because just strategically, so I've focused on it around the launches of my books, and I felt like I needed to expose myself around the book launches to a broad audience. I had kind of gone deep for a while, where for 3.5 years I was writing very regularly, about 10 to 15 times a month for Forbes, and I was and continue to write regularly for the Harvard Business Review. Those were great things, great platforms, but they also are, I was doing a lot in one place. So if you were a Forbes reader, if you were a Harvard Business Review reader, you probably had seen my name a number of times, but I wasn't convinced that a lot of outside people necessarily had. I mean, they might have, because things get shared on social media, but nonetheless, I thought, you know what? if I'm going to sell a lot of copies of the book, I need to put myself in front of new audiences. And so I thought the best way that I could do that en masse was to do just a bunch of different business podcasts where obviously the listeners are self-identifying as people who are interested in business and entrepreneurship and want to improve at that.
Now, how do you usually do your, well, I know I'm one person who reached out to you, and I'm sure plenty of other people do, but because you do so many, I'm curious, do you have an agency that you work with that helps you do the booking, or is most of it through referrals, or how do you come up with your strategy for where you want to appear for people who they might not do as many as you did, but for people who are thinking about guesting on podcasts as part of their strategy?
Yeah, I actually did not work with a specific booker or agency.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's a lot of good people who do stuff like that. You know, I have a friend named Nicole Holland who does it. A good friend of mine.
I just interviewed her the other day.
Yeah, she's awesome. I have a good friend named Marie Incontrera who does a great job with stuff like that. So there's different folks you can go to for help. When people ask me sometimes, how did you book 160 podcast interviews? And the trick is you don't have to do proactive outreach to 160 podcast interviews. If you get yourself on, let's say, between 30 and 50, the rest will take care of itself, mm-hmm. because the podcasters will hear you and they'll be like, oh, well, Dorie hasn't been on my podcast. And then they'll reach out to you. It's really just getting the first domino tipped, as it were. So for that, a really easy way you can do it, honestly, is look at somebody that you would consider kind of an analog for you. Somebody who you admire and kind of has a similar focus in their business. Like if you're a productivity person, maybe you'd say, okay, well, who's another productivity author that is like maybe just a few steps ahead of me, right? Mm-hmm. And you don't want to look at Tony Robbins or somebody because they've got this like whole echelon of you're probably not going to be on the Today Show,
and they've got a machine behind them.
Yeah, but if you look at somebody that's just like, a couple steps ahead of you and you say, okay, well, what podcasts have they been on? And so you can actually search for that. You can search on their website, you can search on iTunes and just see and make note of that. That's like a really super simple life hack version. And it's almost like your version of the Amazon, if you like this, you'll like that. Mm-hmm. And so you can reach out to those people because you can say, hey, I understand that you're interested in guests who talk about productivity. I talk about productivity, and make your pitch.
I love it. And that's how you got me. Now I know the strategy. Now I know how you got me. Heard you on all that. I was like, what is going on? All the people you mentioned here, I'm like, oh yeah, I love so-and-so. So I listened to so many of the podcasts and just kept hearing you and about the book. Just had to reach out. So it definitely works for everyone listening.
Amazing.
Now, yes. Now, one of the things you mentioned was about your blogging and writing and doing about 10 to 15 posts a month, did you say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So speaking about blogging as our second to last thing, I want to be conscious of your time. So I'm moving through. How do we stay motivated to keep writing as much as you did, or maybe a little bit less, or even a little bit more, especially in the early days when we might feel like no one is watching or reading?
One of the most important things that you can do is actually to make the space to be able to do it. Mm-hmm. I think that's what holds a lot of people back, honestly, is that they say, well, I don't have time. And the truth is they don't have time. Mm-hmm. And so, it's not irrational, but if you really consider it a priority, if it's enough of a priority strategically, then you got to find a way to make time. And that doesn't mean, not sleeping. What it means, this is very hard and very painful for people, is that you have to find a way to cut out the low value work. So, So meaning, who are your clients that are the most annoying? Who are your clients that pay you the least money? You should be eliminating about 10% of those per year. And that is so hard for people because it's like, oh my God, I'm willfully turning money away. Why would I do that? But if you want to have a successful business, just think like a gardener, right? You got to prune the dead shit. That's what you need to do.
Exactly. Got to let it go.
Yes. And so having the strength to do that and invest the time in content creation instead is one of the best things you can do. I have a coaching client, an executive coaching client, that really was struggling with this. And this has been her big breakthrough this year, is her willingness to make this happen.
And should we focus on leveraging our blogs for revenue or for exposure, or both?
exposure first, revenue later.
Now
That's
exposure first because
exposure first because, first of all, it's going to be hard to get revenue anyway in the beginning if you don't have that many readers.
Right.
Whereas if you get a lot of readers, then it's actually kind of easy to get money because a lot of brands will be like, whoa, you have that many readers? Okay, we want to reach that many readers. So don't even worry about revenue at first. Just build your audience, and then over time, opportunities will present themselves once you build it up to a sufficient point.
And number 7, we talked earlier about events. I'm excited to hear what you're up to with live events, but talk to us why it's a good idea to consider bringing our followers or communities together for an event.
For sure. I'm excited to answer this, and then I probably should jump because part of my secret to success is, oh my goodness, planning back-to-back phone calls.
Exactly. That's why I was like, I want to get through all of them.
Yes, thank you. So for live events, this was actually, this is not necessarily the first thing that I would suggest that people do because the logistics can be onerous, can be complicated to get enough people. It's not necessarily easy. But once you have begun to build a community, it can be a really fun and interesting thing to do. And so, for instance, in 2016, I launched my Recognized Expert course. And after a while, members of the Recognized Expert course, came to me and they said, oh, we love all these people that we're meeting in the Facebook community. We want to get together. We want to meet in person. And so I realized, okay, there's interest in this. Maybe we should do something. So I've actually had 3 different live events over the past 18 months or so, and it's really given people a chance to connect in person, build good, solid, deep relationships. So that's been amazing. But in my case, it came organically from a suggestion of my community. So I would say focus on building enough of an audience first, and then it presents you with more opportunities to get people together for live events.
Thank you so much. I appreciate you being here and going through that long list of questions with me. And it's just been great. Your book is amazing. I'll make sure we link to it and everything.
Well, thank you, Elayne. I appreciate it. And if it's possible, actually, to also mention or link to my 88-question Entrepreneurial You self-assessment.
Oh, yes.
I appreciate that. That is at DorieClark.com/entrepreneur.
DorieClark.com/entrepreneur. Thank you, Dorie.
You are welcome. Good talking with you.
Okay, take care.
Thanks. Bye.
All right. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dorie. To find out more, to get in touch with her, to get that free assessment that she mentioned, and to find out how to get your copy of Entrepreneurial You, make sure you go to supportissexypodcast.com and just search Dorie, Dorie. Her show notes page will pop up with all of the links, the resources, the link to that assessment, all that great stuff. It will be in there. Supportissexypodcast.com. Go to the search icon at the top and just search Dorie. Now, until our next episode, never forget, support is sexy, and having it all doesn't mean doing it all alone. And I'll talk to you soon. Take care.